parts of applications. Fantastic, thanks for reporting. We help these non-technical teams be empowered to actually create components that you can use to improve a web app or website. So by far the most common thing we make are kind of the first, I call initial pages when you come into a product that help a user understand what your product does. And kind of what are the first couple of things to get started on. We make a lot of checklists, to be honest. But really it's all about how do we reduce the cost to actually try things, because onboarding is actually a super iterative process. You're not going to figure it out in one go, if you're just not. And so a lot of what we try to do is help you create a flow, make changes to it yourself without sort of getting bogged down in the engineering back and forth. And then when you're ready to potentially change it as your company expands, your market expands, and maybe you have different size companies or maybe you have different industries. And so really our goal is to kind of give them the most relevant experience possible. So think a little bit like Netflix, kind of the initial homepage you come to. How do we make that look and feel like really relevant for the individual user that's first coming into your product? And I think it's kind of fun, maybe just talk a little bit about the founding part. So I actually started Candu, my co-founder, Michele. I'm not a coder, I can't code. So I was working in these SaaS companies and feeling thwarted, I would say, to get a lot of my ideas in. It was hard. It's hard, right? It's hard when you're really competing for really scarce developer resources to say, hey, can we just update the copy on this button, or can I try, this new use case I think will be valuable? It's just a really hard battle to pick when there's kind of core functionality to build, even though it's super valuable for kind of that new user experience. And I was actually building my wedding website with Wix, which is a fantastic no-code website builder. And one of the things that's really great is it has this lovely drag and drop interface that you can use to kind of construct these, in this case, mostly static websites. But I was like, hey, I think we can use some of this stuff actually in the context of a web app to kind of give that initial experience. And that's really where it took off. So we're the flavor of no code, but instead of making the entire website, we're really looking to kind of create little bits and pieces that you can use to enhance a user experience, and really thinking about kind of what should the onboarding experience look like and how should it change. Great, sorry, I just talked at you for a while, but hopefully that was kind of helpful. Jerry, anything to add to that one?
No, I think you nailed it. Just empowering people who may not be as technically savvy to be able to have a say over what the experience is. I can show an example if that's helpful, but yeah.
Before we jump into examples, I wanted to ask you, both of you, why you chose onboarding as a in PLG is of course a vast area. There are many things, moving parts in PLG. So why onboarding? Why do you think it is very important, and what's your take on it?
Yeah. So actually, I think a really interesting part of onboarding is it's the space between your marketing site, where you do a lot of experimentation, and your product, which it's much more expensive to experiment with. So it's actually kind of the next layer in that journey. And also, if you think about it, often we design not for the first user experience, but we really design for the advanced user experience. A great example of this would be like release notes. If I'm a new user, a release note is not all useful information to me. I don't care that you are up on SDK package 3.6, right? This is not important to me. But that's kind of how we generally come into the mindset of, which is why I think onboarding is such an interesting space, because it's really, really about simplification, about removing things that are extraneous and getting into the core about, how do we first deliver value to a user? And so I think it's a good, a good place to start. And then just to be totally honest, everyone's talking about onboarding. So it's really easy for us to kick off a conversation. It's a great place to start.
Yeah, that's a very honest answer. And I like the aspect of, and I can totally resonate to what you said. And some of the folks on this call will relate to it. That when you normally the intuitive approach is to design for the power user or the advanced user, what you call the admins who run, whereas the end user is always forgotten in the process, because your buying unit is the admin, right? So you go and sell to an administrator or a power user in the company, so you want to please them first, and then comes so the end users are actually stepchilds in a sense. So I think you're you're trying to surface it to I get it. I mean, I know what I can totally relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think especially in the world of enterprise SaaS, you're often building because, hey, we need to make sure we have all of these features so that, we can pass procurement. But the reality is like 90% of those things are just not important to the core, to the first value piece. Yeah. So,
correct.
Yeah.
So good. Thank you for that, piece of information. And follow-up question on that: when you have you seen any examples, or have you come across any clients or products for that matter, where you have two unique buyer persona or user personas? So you have a power user or a advanced user who's basically configuring and using it as more as a system of record, if you know what I mean, that on a day-to-day basis, it's their day-to-day tool. So they log in every time, they use it every day. Whereas the large part of the organization, they don't use it. It's not that their day-to-day system. They come in once in a while, let's say a couple of times in a week to do some activity on that. So you have mix of users in any organization. You have an advanced user, power user is what we call, and you have set of normal users, end users. How do you in your experience, how do you handle these two different journeys, in onboarding journeys? And is Candu flexible enough to handle persona-based, journeys?
Yeah, such a great question. Yeah, I think it's very unlikely that you have only one journey for your product. It's actually, I think we think of it like new user becomes power user, but the reality is that there's often an admin who has a really different set of requirements and things to do. And often there's also like some sort of consumer. So someone who's like not really in the product, but is trying to understand the value that it brings to them, in addition to your kind of end user. So there's often at least three is what I'd say is most common. And really, I think the mistake that a lot of product teams make is that they kind of build a little bit over here for this one, a little bit over here for this one, a little bit over here for this one, which gets really complicated. Ideally, what happens is that you kind of have one, the initial screen, the first thing that they see, kind of like the lobby of your product that speaks to kind of what that persona needs. And so a lot of what we do is actually help you kind of create these, we call them dynamic onboarding experiences that will change based on who's logging in. And often they'll tell you, hey, I'm here because I'm here to set up the account, or I'm here because I want to look at a report. If we think about like probably the most common example of this, like a CRM system, the person who's constructing the fields and the person who is filling the fields in to get a deal done could not be more different and could not have more different needs. Yeah, for sure.
Correct. Great. So I want you to talk a little more about how do you and a lot of people here have read the book Product Led Growth by Wes Bush. Some of them are converts. I myself am a convert. If PLG is a religion, I'm a convert. So let me put it that way.
You're a believer.
Yeah, a believer. Yeah. So what I realize is, and I want you to well deeper into this, is how if you know the how part of it is easy to figure out, whether you have tools like Candu to help their no code low code, or if there is an engineering might within the company, they will develop themselves. That's the what part of it. But the first trick in onboarding is how, what. So your product is always deeper. You have like 20 things that you want to tell your customers because you want to sell. Ultimately, you want to convert the customer. So how do you choose those checklists of 5-7 things which will give that aha moment to that customer? And are there any heuristics? Are there, in your experience, how do you go about deciding which of those 5 things you want to communicate? Is there any heuristic model in your mind that you apply to decide these are the important things that you should tell your customer first, and others can be, as you go along, it can come surface?
Yeah, we talk about the point of realized first value, right? I think that's such an important concept, and it's sometimes really hard to get there, right? So I think about like an app like Uber Eats or Deliveroo or one of these tools, right? It's not when you order, it's when it arrives, right? That's the point where when you get to taste it, that's the real point of value or outside your door, right? And so I think it's usually sometimes pretty obvious what kind of the point of first value is for a user. Although to be honest, it's often very difficult to get there in one session. And I think this is where people fall down, because you say, you'll get to value, but once config is done, once people are up and running, once we've gotten the data in. So there's often like this big gap between your first session and then when they actually get to value. So a little trick that's very helpful is that every step along the path, we call it the shortest path to value, but like the direct steps you need to take, just reinforce what the value will be. Your hamburger is going to be delicious. It's coming in 5 minutes, right? So you're kind of giving them, you're putting the breadcrumbs, I don't know why I'm on a food metaphor, for how to get there. We call it the happy path. It's the most direct route. And then the whole time you're saying, and the value is going to be so good once it arrives. And that's really the way to think about it. It's not just what needs to happen, it's how good the hamburger will taste.
Yeah. So the end state of value, you have to keep reminding them that, look, you're just about there, you're about to get there, and it is going to taste good. That's a very important point that you've covered. Yes, that's yeah. I can relate to that. Yeah.
One other thing I want to reference on this point too is that's really, really important to not let people deviate too much for that until they get to that first value. So we really, really are strong believers in one thing at a time. Not, don't give them 6 features to choose from necessarily. Maybe give them 3 or even better 1 with a continue button, right? That's a much more effective way to kind of communicate. Take some choice out of the equation, at least at this first part. You can reintroduce it in the future.
Correct. That sounds good. So the next I'm trying to pick your mind on more of onboarding side only. So Jerry will see some examples on Candu shortly. One interesting question that I at least come across, because some of the startups on this call itself have posed this question to me before, is see, if you have a micro SaaS, right, you have very horizontal platforms of 90s and 2000s, the success factors, workdays of the world. Then you have verticals.
You can do anything. Yes.
Yeah, you can do anything. Then you have vertical SaaS solutions saying that, okay, I go deeper into this particular area, which is what we are in. If you take Huminos, we are a vertical SaaS in OKRs and performance. We go deeper in that one area. Now there are micro SaaS. So if you take Notion or Calendly, they have a very specific, small, very sharp use case, and everything revolves around that. Now, if you and this is a benefit question for some of the folks on this call, is if you have a vertical SaaS, which is very deep into, which requires configurations, which have this to multiple personas, how do you, simplify onboarding in that kind of a thing? So it's coming back to the first question, but still, it's easier said than done, because I personally realized,
Always. I think I would always recommend chunking it, right? If you have a hub-based product that has different, we call them jobs, so jobs to be done. Let's say, for example, you have you're trying to set up health insurance, and you can get, you need to set up payroll, and you also need to set up vacation days, right? Those are actually just different products. And so really each one of those should have its own very focused onboarding. Figuring out which one to serve is an art, and it's not a science. But figuring out how to improve the onboarding with each chunk, that is something you can do with science. That's a great example of when you want to think about, let's not boil the ocean here. Let's not mix and match. Let's kind of make sure they get to first realize value with this kind of product line. And I'm making it sound simple, but it is not. I'm not pretending that it is.
Right, sure. I get that. So I mean, I have a few questions. I don't want to hog the time of others. So one of the area I want you to touch upon is, how do you measure the success of onboarding? How do you constantly measure it, and you feel, at some point you feel good about it. So what's that, secret sauce to feel good about that my onboarding is working?
You're going to hate this answer, but it matters, but it also doesn't really matter. You need to pick a baseline metric that you believe to be true, especially in the early days, you don't have a lot of data. And then your job is to move the metric, right? So this, like, picking the metric is a little bit of, putting your finger in the air. Eventually, when you have more data, you'll be able to say, what causes accounts to churn versus stick around versus upgrade. And you get a little more like scientific about it. But at the beginning, it's kind of just a thought experiment. And then everything you do, from your onboarding flow to your emails to your conversations, is around how do we move that metric. It's because it's not actually important what the absolute is. What's important is the relative change.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I get that. So just building upon that, one of the questions that some of the founders asked me was about how do you hand off from onboarding, right? The next stage, the conversion. So people try, and so two questions around that. What is, in your experience, a good sign up to activation ratio, typically, and then once, that's first question. Is the second one is, when you hand off, so once the onboarding is done, now how does it go into the sales motions or the product led sales? Is there a handoff? Does Candu help in such kind of handoffs also?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot in that one.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, onboarding activation rates are really going to vary by product line. So it's a little bit hard to say. A rule of thumb for a landing page conversion is about 10%. A good performing landing page would be about 10%. Maybe an ad might be like 3. But those are super broad, and it's really going to depend on your industry. So I can't give you a more concrete than that, unfortunately.
No, I get that, but I was just looking for, if is 5% a good number, can be better. You never know. And the second, you never know.
Yeah.
The second question was around what kind of handoffs typically happen after the onboarding journey is done. How does it kick off into the sales motion, right?
Yeah, and I think this is actually such an important part of it, because I think a lot of people think, oh, product led means that you're free forever and you never talk to a salesperson, and like it's almost like a religion, right, against
Correct.
sales, and that's really not true. It's actually, this is a blend, right? It's really going to depend on, can an individual, for it to be truly product led, you kind of need an individual to be able to get to value immediately, almost within the first session with a specific use case. For most SaaS products, that's not possible, because you need multiple people, it takes multiple sessions. There's some complexity or like some change management that needs to happen. And so actually it's more of a continuum, right? It's not black or white, right? When it comes to product led versus sales led. The way I would think about it is your product or offering well suited toward being truly product led, or is it really close to enterprise sales, or is it somewhere in the middle? And then what we can think about is, when do we need a user to actually interact with someone? When should we introduce points of friction? So an example could be, you can go ahead and play with the tool, but when you want to install, you need to talk to a salesperson or an integration consultant. Another example could be, you can go ahead and use it as much as you want, but you're going to have to interact with a person on the team if you want to set up an important integration. Those are kind of two very common points, but you can think of a lot of things like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Great example.
Friction is not bad. Friction is not bad.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But just enough friction. It shouldn't.
Right.
It's a delicate thing. You don't want the customer to fall off either.
Very true. Very true.
Cool.
Very true.
Cool. Jerry, I stopped you from showing some examples. Now is the time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm happy to. We have a lot of examples that kind of resonate with what you guys were speaking about.
Yeah.
I can share them in the chat. I think probably the best one is going to be our People Data Labs, one of our clients. Really what they did is they were able to drive their activation rates by personalizing the login experience based on what your intake form is. So basically their UI changes depending on what your role is. Because to Jonathan's point, like different people care about different things. So accordingly, their activation and their onboarding journey should actually be significantly different based off that.
Yeah. So I'm just sharing. Hope you don't mind for others to
No.
benefit what you're. Okay.
Yeah. So I think one thing I like about this onboarding flow is that the first question before this page is kind of like, describe to me what your role is. Are you in product, or are you in engineering, or are you in marketing? And then based on that sort of initial input, then we'll give you either a more technical implementation checklist or something that's a little bit more, talk to someone to kind of get started. And I think that kind of flexibility can be really helpful when it comes to making your onboarding experience look and feel really relevant for your user base. So
correct. So cool. This is helpful. So generally, what are the components of onboarding? Onboarding is a journey, and there are a few things in that. So for the benefit of others on this call, how do you weave that journey? What are the different components? What I mean is checklist, the aha moments. So anybody who has read the book will know these things. I for sure remember, but I want you to, because you internalized it into product. So
I put myself on mute. No, I'd love to hear from you what you see as the kind of key phases of onboarding. I've described a couple of them, but yeah, what stuck with you?
So when I was implementing internally, is most of it. See, we have in our this, because it is specific to my product. We have a challenge of to make the user focus. So we have OKRs, and then we have one-on-ones, conversations, feedbacks, and recognitions, and then you have a performance evaluation, which is behavior assessments and all that. So now these three are not necessarily used in one go. So we had to force the user to give their intent. What is the real focus on? And we saw this in Monday.com. So I sheepishly aped Monday.com's onboarding process.
Theirs is excellent, by the way. Truly great. If you haven't seen it before.
So,
and if you want to build something similar, come to Candu. We can give you Monday.com's onboarding experience. But yes, I love it. Yeah.
Correct. So I did. I mean, there are so many examples, and Monday.com very specifically stuck with me, because it asks you. There is a know your customer in terms of which team you belong to, the persona. Are you an engineering head or HR or co-founder? Then what is your real intent in coming and trying this product? It forces you to pick one out of those 3-4 things. And then accordingly the checklist. So I had to customize that because there was no tool available I picked up that one part of Monday.com to force the user to focus on one thing, and the checklist is based on that. So it's a logical decision tree is involved there. Then the host of things, the touch points, in the sense, so because there is no CRM like a HubSpot, there is no PLG specific CRM. So what we had to do was we use Zoho. So we had to customize Zoho to we created an API to send the product signals, and based on each signal, whether they have done that activity or not, smart touch points. If somebody, I can't send irrespective of, it's easy for me to send if there are 5 checklist items, one after the other, I can send, but I have to be smart, means most people would have done 2 out of those 3, 5. So there I have to touch only the rest of the 3. So these things troubled me a lot. There's no hands-on tool, so we had to build internally. But I think these are some things that have really helped me, because the ultimate validation was Hoshank. Sorry, you can, you are mute. Correct. So Hoshank is a budding entrepreneur. He's a SaaS founder of a company called Conb, which is into RevOps, integrates with Salesforce, and it's interesting product to look at. So coming back to what components so there are checklists, there are tooltips. Now in tooltips, I did the cardinal mistake of assuming that user would know my language. So I had to dumb it down and make it contextual. So that took a time. Then the other component was the smart touch points. Then reading signals of onboarding. So once we set all these checklists and all these things, how they are behaving inside. So we didn't implement any mix panel or Hotjar inside the tool at that time. Now we have, but we had to really see the signals. That something where I struggled a bit. And
you brought up so many good topics here. I think a couple of flavors I think are really important. That we just talked about. One of them is making sure that you really understand the job that the user is here to do, that they've kind of elected what they're into. I think it's a really, really good start. The second one that you brought up is actually a checklist, which is like a straightforward kind of here are the steps that need to happen. And that's super valuable if you know, if you have a linear path. Some products don't though. Some products have, you can do A, B, or C. And so it might be a task list might be a better fit for that, or maybe cards. With shortcuts. And then I think a third kind of concept that's really valuable here is that idea of a recipe. So what is a simple use case that uses your product that delivers value that you can kind of present to the user so they can kind of make a decision to get started. So in this case, maybe it's just feedback or it's just the OKR, but how do we kind of simplify and then present very straightforward options that have very few customizations is great.
Do you think,
really cool.
do you think, Airtable or Monday.com or, for example, even Canva. So nowadays, most of these are bringing templates. So it will first ask you what is your focus. So are you a designer? So it shows designer specific templates. So in enterprise SaaS, those who are having a lot of workflows, those things, right? In consumer SaaS, it's easy to bring this up because the use case itself is small, your micro SaaS. But if you have vertical solutions where there are workflows, approvals involved, how do you surface these templates? Is it a good idea? Have you seen any company doing these things? I would love to know.
Yeah. A good example would actually, So one example might be like DocuSign, right? It can be actually very complex workflows for how a deal gets approved. When you first get started, when you first get into the tool, it's really 5 steps to send your first envelope, right? It's not going to be the one that you're going to stick with. It's just, here's the simplest version of whatever that workflow is. I'm assuming that the quote to cash tool as well, there's probably similar workflows. And sort of saying kind of here's, one A versus B versus C, and kind of presenting those as kind of the initial ways to jump off. So the user gets this flavor for what they can do, because often they don't really may not even understand. They may not know how to sort themselves until they see that on the screen. So it's a really, I love, there's a lot of complexity. So, and your tool can do a million things. I'm sure we build a lot of builder tools that have a lot of configuration options. And I want you to hide all of that stuff and present the smallest thing you can that gives the illusion of choice in this case.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it would, I'm trying to summarize, what you're saying is, would it be a correct statement to say that product-led onboarding, if you opt for that journey, product-led, it kind of really forces you to come to that core value that your product promises and deliver it in the easiest way, fastest way possible? Is that
yes? And if you truly can't deliver it, because a lot of us are not able to with our current setup, then you need to at least tell the user what the most important value is. So it's the perceived value and making that incredibly clear. But yes, I'd say it's such a good distillation of it.
Yeah, cool. So I'll pause here. I can ask hundreds of such questions, but I'll pause here. I think it's fantastic coverage on your experience. For the benefit of people we have like 20 participants, so I'll open the Q&A session. It's 8:05. We have like 15 minutes to pick it up. Anyone, please feel free to ask questions. This is the Q&A time. If you're shy to ask, please type in the chat. I will ask that question on your behalf.
No one has a product they're curious about how to onboard to? No one has a favorite onboarding experience?
My guess is someone is trying to speak but is on mute. Just in case if you're speaking, please remember you're on mute.
Okay, I think I will start then.
Yeah.
So I have a simple question, John, and it's not simple actually, but so there is this concept of a magic number, right? Which is the correlation between certain behaviors that your customers need to go through, and after which they're likely to retain or stay, right? There was a lot of magic number that went around with these companies, right?
Seven friends in 10 days. Yeah, of course.
That's what I'm talking about. So, again, in terms of retention, right? A key thing here becomes like, how do you activate your customers, or how do you ensure that your customers reach the magic number in the shortest duration, right? And onboarding, again, I feel would play a major role in this, right? To set that stage and, give your customers enough information so that they can actually achieve that. So do you have any thoughts on that you can share, which can, help a lot of us here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think what you're referring to is this concept of a threshold with which someone has then activated. So there's a really famous like Facebook apocryphal story. It's not totally true, but they basically had this rule of thumb that if you had 7 friends connect with you within 10 days, then you end up being you'd be a user for life. Was kind of the magic number. And the way that they got to that number was really complex in terms of the statistical significance of people downloading the application. But it was really just really helpful because that was kind of their baseline, like what do you need to get to? So the first most important thing you can do is you can tell your users what is the metric that you think is valuable, right? You are on Facebook because you were here to connect with your friends, right? By far the most important thing you can do for your users is say, hey, whatever you deem to be like what counts as activated, let's just tell users that so that they become acclimated and they understand what is the purpose of the tool and what they should be doing first. So I think that's by far the easiest and smartest thing you can do. The second thing I would add to that is if you want to get a little bit more clever, you can say, okay, let's give people a score. How far along are you toward achieving that goal? And this is a really good time for like a ticker or anything like to make it a little bit more gamified, what makes you activated versus not. There's a lot of people use badges for this, but how do you basically say, hey, here's what's important to me and how close am I to achieving that within my time frame? Yeah, great question.
I think that's a great point of gamification that you've just shared, right? Because Notion does this extremely well. So download the application, they give you some sort of an advantage. If you cover everything, they used to give you, I think, 2 months or 3 months of trial or something at the start. So
yeah. There's a lot of great tools that kind of how do you say they give you more time in the product by moving closer to the magic number, which of course is in their best interest. It's like being rewarded for airline miles for being on a flight, right? It's kind of a similar concept, but in our tech world. So Expensify, I think, does this quite well. They extend your trial or your free days based on how many expense reports you file. Makes sense. How else do you get someone to onboard? Yeah.
Great, thanks for that, John.
Yeah, great question.
Hoshank, if you are speaking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay,
go ahead, Hoshank. Yeah.
But just
sorry, Hoshank, it's bad network.
Yeah. So what, according to you, would be the am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. Just had one question. So when you're building your first team for a product-led growth product, what would be your first 3 hires which you would look at?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, who would you want on your team?
Yeah.
When kind of building your when you're first like your initial product led.
No, let me rephrase that question. I think what Hoshank is hinting at is, if you are going PLG first, so you are already in SLG mode and then you are adopting, that's one way of doing. But if you are a very young startup and you are going PLG first, so what are those 3 important hires that you have to do? Which roles? Am I correct, Hoshang? Is that what you want to ask?
Right. Thanks, Sundar.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, it depends how early you are in the process, but some really important hires for you. You're going to be running a lot of experiments, and so you're going to need people or users to do that. So you're probably going to need someone that works on demand gen specifically, because it's just a really cheap way to test with products. The second person you're going to want is someone in design, or who can basically build prototypes very quickly and rapidly. And this is really like the ideation person I would really recommend hiring. And then the third person is probably someone who's going to be actually running the experiment, which is usually a product manager or someone in data analytics. It could also be a user researcher, would be another example of this. And of course, these are not any of the people who are actually building the product, right? So there's some really core engineering roles you're probably going to hire for as well. But we only got 3, so yeah.
Got it. Thanks, John. This was helpful. Thanks.
Cool.
We have 4 more minutes. If anyone wants to ask questions, please feel free. No questions? Okay. Cool. So cool. Feel free, and in case if you have any questions, do post in the community. I will post this recorded session. You can share internally, and Jonathan pinged his email ID here. And I, in my last conversation with Jerry on Roundtable on PLG, I promised him that I'm going to look at Candu and try it. He will try my tool. We'll give brutal feedback to each other. So
love it.
So yeah, so I'm going to try that once this sprint is over, in case you guys are interested. Some of you, Hoshang, especially in your case, because you're starting up, you should look at these tools. So some of them, like Laksha, they are in a very advanced stage. They are probably GoComment is a very deep logistic software, managing the freight forwarders and import export. That area was nothing was invented in that area after email. So these guys went and shook the entire space. I'm an angel investor in them, early angel, and I love what those guys are doing. They have just raised Series A recently. So Shashank, Factory Plus is again a great product that they are building. He was head of Android development in my previous startup, which I exited in 2019. He's now a CTO of the new startup. Again, Factory Plus is doing pretty well, and I'm rooting for those guys. So, and there are so many here now, I don't remember. Some of them I interact quite often, so I know, and there are many here at home. It's difficult to cover all of them. So guys, if you have any questions, 1 more minute, otherwise we'll close this. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Jerry, for this session. Looking forward to have many more such with you guys. And I'm pretty sure some of us will try Candu. And
Great.
if you have any, use cases or customer stories or videos that you want to post, there is in the community, please do post. We can amplify, because some of the many founders have not joined actually. Some of the team members have joined, so they can see those things also. Yeah,
this is great. Yeah, this was so much fun.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just one last quick question, which is so with respect to no code or low code solutions, right? In most cases, when I hear about a low code solution, I feel that I will be limited in terms of either the design or the functionality in terms of implementing this, and which is why every time that I think about an onboarding experience, I think, why don't we develop it ourselves, because that will allow us to be more flexible with the design.
Yeah, totally.
Always tempting. Yeah, always tempting.
Yeah.
So it's when I look for tools versus in-house development, Laksha, the one parameter that I apply always is how fast you want to get it done. If I want to move fast, then I buy. If I'm okay and not in a hurry, then I try to build that. That's typically a mental model I apply. Not works every time, but so far it's worked. So
Understood.
If I can actually challenge that a little bit, I think actually there might be somewhere else that you want to be, which is actually a both. I would really recommend starting with an editor or something that can help you learn what your onboarding ought to be, because even though it won't be pixel perfect necessarily, although of course ours will be pixel perfect, you will be able to learn quickly what it should do based on how users actually interact with it. You'll get some signal on it. And then if you do decide to eventually build it yourself in-house, fantastic. You're now like several steps further down the path of figuring out what it ought to be. And so you actually can use those learnings to then make an even better version. So I would say do both. It's not an either or. This is it's a step beyond prototyping. I would say is when you can use kind of a no-code, low-code tool. So
that makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks again, everyone. We'll leave Jonathan here. You have a great evening ahead. Sorry, morning ahead, and good night to all of you guys. See you soon for the next session. Thank you again, Jerry. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for
Bye.
having us. It was a lot of fun.
Yep.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.